We are live with Susan Magnano. We're talking about long exposures, getting creative with them. So for all those people that love to go out and take night shots or daytime shots with a really, really, really heavy filter, we're going to be talking about all of that. So Susan is the what would you say, owner, founder, photor?
Sure.
What do
Yes,
you consider yourself? That sounds about right?
I'm the founder and like lead photographer slash educator. I'm everything. I am
She's
photo
everything.
vintage. So
Awesome. So she's a photographer. She is an educator. Not every photographer is an educator, and not every educator is a photographer. So we are blessed to have somebody who is both with us today. That being said, if you do have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the Q&A if you're joining us on Zoom. And if you are watching on Facebook, you can leave them in the comments section, and we will make sure to get them asked to Susan. So Susan, that being said, also, I'm going to turn it over to you because nobody wants to hear me
awesome.
talk.
Well, thank you, Derek, and thank you, B&H Events Space. I'm so excited to be here talking with you guys about my favorite thing, creating long exposures. So for those who don't know me, Derek did a great job introducing me, but I run a company called Photo Adventures, which is a photo adventure company, and we do workshops all over America. Right now, I'm quarantining in an RV out in Utah. I kind of got stuck out here, and I'm living the dream, going to national parks every day and scouting new places for my upcoming workshops. Hopefully by 2021, we'll be right on track for some fun workshops, but we got some more scheduled for this coming year. So let's hope that things get back to normal so we can do that. But today, let's jump right in. I have a long presentation, lots of details. It's going to be really fun. So let's get started. What are long exposures? Long exposure photography is a technique where you use a slow shutter speed to capture movement, motion, and create impact. So that's what we're going to review today. We're going to talk about long exposures in all lighting conditions: daytime, blue hour, moonlight, nighttime. We're going to talk about how to use filters, everything from neutral density filters, variable filters, stacking filters. And we're going to discuss my favorite topic, light painting, landscape, portraits, and light graffiti, as well as get into doing star trails. That is a lot of information, so hang tight. For those of you guys who do not want to take notes and just want to kind of take in the presentation, I'm going to be sending out an abbreviated version of this presentation along with my gear guide that links to all the B&H, links to all the gear I use. So take down my website, Susan at Photo Adventures. I'm happy to send you guys the gear guide and an abbreviated version of this presentation. So you guys can just sit back and relax. This is the gear I use. I shoot with a Canon 5D Mark IV. Basically for long exposure photography, you can shoot with a mirrorless camera, an SLR camera. I shoot predominantly with a 16 to 35 millimeter because I like having a wide lens. And also I like having a 2.8 when I'm doing star photography. A couple key pieces of equipment that you'll need will be an intervalometer or a remote trigger. I've included this one called the Vela wireless shutter boss, which I used to use a lot, but now I use the Canon app. So if you guys have a camera from the last 2 years, check and see if your camera has an app, because it could have a remote shutter on it. And the benefit of using this app is that I can actually see the images on my phone and make adjustments remotely. So it's really, really awesome to be able to do that, to be standing like a couple feet away, do some light painting, and then look at the picture afterwards and not have to walk over and look at the back of my camera. And you can actually change the settings by using this app. So I know Sony has an awesome app like this, and I'm pretty sure Nikon does too. So check it out. Another crucial piece of equipment is a L bracket. And the reason why I think this is so important is if you've ever done a vertical shot on a regular tripod head and you turn your camera vertical, it sinks. And especially when you're doing a long exposure, it could sink and ruin the picture. The benefit of using this L bracket, and I'll show you guys one right here, is that you just turn the camera like this, and now the tripod will stay upright. So instead of having the camera flop over like this on the tripod, the tripod head will be completely straight and balanced. So that's the benefit of using an L bracket. I love it. I'm a new user of L brackets. I don't know what took me so long to get one, but now I can't live without it. So check them out, and they're fairly cheap. B&H sells a bunch of them. I use a Sunway Photo one. So tripods, main ingredient for doing long exposures. I have had a variety of different tripods. I've had Manfrotto, I've had Gitsos. I just bought a new Gitso. I can't wait for it to arrive. So I recommend just having a sturdy tripod with you. Okay, now we're gonna get into some quick lighting gear, and I'm gonna teach you guys how to do this. So the Lytra Pro, this tool is so cool because it has a full spectrum lighting continuum, which means that you can change the color temperature. Another cool thing is you can bring it down to 5%. What I wanted to show you guys here was I was shooting a meteor shower, and the photos on the right taken with the Lytra, and I was able to dim the Lytra Pro down to 5%. I put it on a light stand, and I was able to just illuminate this mountain range and get the Milky Way rising. I actually created a time lapse, which I'll show you at the end of this presentation, of the Milky Way core rising over this mountain. And for 3 hours of producing this this time lapse, the Lytra still had like almost full battery. But granted, it was at 5%, but still, it's a great tool, and you can bring it in the rain. It's really durable. Lytra's little brother is called the Torch. It has 3 settings. I have it right here. It does 3 different modes of brightness and also strobe. It's really fun for light painting. This is the other one, the Lytra Pro I was just showing you. It's a little bit bigger, but it's an awesome tool. The Luxley Viola and the Lytra Pro are always like competing against each other. I never know which one to use because they're similar tools, and I got both of them. There's some benefits to both of them. The Lytra Pro is like way more durable. I can throw it around and it's like metal and it can get wet. The Luxley Viola is a little bit more fragile, and I'm a little bit nervous of breaking it. Like, look how nice it is. But it's cool. It does the same thing. It has, you can change the color balance, which is really beautiful and it's spot on. And you can also dim it down to 1%. But now with the app, you can even dim it down to 0.5%, which is awesome. And you wonder, why would you want it to be so dim? So the reason why you'd want it to be dim is, let's say you're going to be doing a long exposure, like let's say 40 minutes of exposing an arch, because you're going to get the star trails over it. If you leave it on full blast, the arch will be overexposed. But by putting it at 0.5%, it's slowly leaking in light throughout the whole picture, so it'll be properly exposed. So that's one of the cool benefits. And I would recommend, if you did get the Luxley Viola, which was on sale at B&H yesterday, I don't know if it is, they have this great softener, so diffusing panel. And I think it makes a huge difference. I think it's an extra 20 bucks. Definitely get it, because it'll diffuse and soften the light. But an awesome tool. As you can see in this picture I use here, I made it warmer to counterbalance the sky, which is really blue. So you could tell the difference. One of my favorite flashlight is this Coast HP7R. What's cool about it is, it looks like it's dead at the moment. Yeah, I used it a lot the other night. What's cool about it is when you extend the front piece, it focuses the beam, and you're able to do this picture to the right where you see the focus beam in the sky. Not every flashlight will do that. So that's why you need one that has a focusing beam. And this flashlight is super strong and awesome. All right, this is my basic starter kit to doing light painting portraits. The Nightcore flashlight, the reason why I recommend this one is because it has this dial, and you're able to dim the light up and down. And that's key when you're working in like city environments, because in city environments, you want to boost it up as high as possible. And I recommend getting a flashlight that's 1,000 lumen or higher when you're working in the city, because you're competing with all the city and ambient light. If you have like 100 lumen flashlight, it's going to do you no good, and you're going to be disappointed real fast. So the cool thing about this one, it has this little wheel that you can power it up and down. And a key important point is, if you're going to make this DIY, do-it-yourself kit, and you're going to buy these tubes, so this is probably the only thing on this list that you can't get at B&H, are these lamp guards, which are basically plastic tubes where you stick the flashlight in, and the clip is going to hold it in place. If it doesn't have the clip, then the flashlight will just slide right into the tube, and it's a big pain in the neck. So consider this as like a little tool that will help everything go smoothly. Lastly, to do these portraits, as you can see the picture sample on the top right, you'll need a speed light. And the cool thing about a speed light is you can power it down. Oops, I don't have my speed light with me, but you would put it in manual mode, and you can power up the flash or power it down. Typically, you're powering it down to like 1/64th of a power, and then 1/64th of a power, and strobing your model on test mode. But we'll get into that. That's a little bit advanced right now. I'm just talking about the gear. Am I talking too fast, Derek?
Not at
No?
all.
Okay, because I have a lot to cover. And guys, I just want you to get everything you can and then email me with any questions. So that was it, your do-it-yourself kit. Now, if you want to get really into this, go to lightpaintingbrushes.com. Sorry, B&H, you don't sell this yet, at least not that I know. But it's this great kit, and I recently invested in it, and I'm one of their ambassadors. Instead of buying like a plastic tube and carrying around a tube so you look like a ninja, you have this one that gets compact. So it makes it super easy to travel with, and it comes with this adapter, which is like a rubber adapter, and you can fit any flashlight in it. So that makes it so much easier, so you don't have to get a really expensive flashlight. These run about like $80 or $70 because you want the pen clip, but also it's a strong flash. But you can make this whole system, and this is a kit that they have. You can get cool tools like this, and then you can get a whole bunch of colors. Excuse me. A whole bunch of colors, and then you can paint with the colors. We're going to get into this too. This is one of my favorite things to do. But lightpaintingbrushes.com, if you guys decide to get this kit, use the discount code PTA20 to get 20% off. Maggie Light and Pixel Stick, they're kind of like cousins. They're kind of the same thing. The Pixel Stick came out, and then the Maggie Light came out, and it's a little bit better. I'm just saying it looks like they took the Pixel Stick, which is kind of delicate, and made it a little bit more robust, and fixed a couple things with the Maggie Light. So I'd recommend getting the Maggie Light. But what's cool about it is it's an LED light wand. So you can actually program images like your logo or a picture of an alien, which actually comes with the downloaded files. You can make scenes from Ghostbusters, which I've done, which I don't know what I'm supposed to do with, but it's just fun. This tool is so creative that I feel like I've barely even tapped into how creative you could get with it. But this is just me dancing with the Pixel Stick at the time in the ocean and getting these cool reflections. But you can program anything, any image you want. They give you instructions on how to size it correctly, and then you use this wand and you basically paint with it in light. It's really a cool device. All right, now we're gonna get into doing light painting, not really light painting, long exposures during the day. So let's say it's bright afternoon and you can't you can't shoot long exposures during the day because it's bright and sunny. So what we're going to do is we're going to put filters on, these ND filters, and it's like putting a pair of sunglasses on your camera. So with less light entering the camera, you will need to slow down your shutter. And ultimately, that is what we're doing. So I'm going to review the 3 different types of filters that you can get to, so you can do these long exposures. You could do these long exposures during the day. So the variable ND filter, it's kind of like the gateway entry filter that most people get because it's cheap and it's who wants to carry around a lot of filters. But there are some flaws with the variable ND filter. The way it works is like 2 polarizers, and when you turn the polarizers together, it darkens the image. But when you get to like the darkest settings that you probably want to stop down so you can have the longest exposures during the day, becomes an X. I'm not sure if every variable filter does this, but my clients who've had this filter, this is what happens. So I would say just skip that and go to screw on non-variable filters. These are amazing. I have an assortment. I use B&W filters, and I think they're awesome because they're dark and they're so easy. All you have to do is screw them on. I have a 10 stop, I have a 6 stop, I'm getting a 3 stop, and they're just easy. You're like, hey, I want to do a long exposure, let's pop it on. And they're kind of pricey. I would say invest in a good one because it's worth its weight in gold. The B&W ones are awesome. The next way, let's say you're really into doing this, a lot of people get the kits, and this would be like a Lee filter kit or a Nisi kit. They're more expensive, and they come with an array of filters that you can buy. So if you look at the bottom, there's a ring that you put on the outside of your filter, and you have the filter on the left, which is the constant like 10-stop filter, and then you have these gradient filters. And the reason why you use a gradient filter is, let's say you're taking a picture at sunset and you want to darken the sky but leave the foreground a little bit brighter just so you can balance it. then you would use this gradient filter, and you're able to stack filters while using these kits. So I would say if you're going to start out with this, try a screw-on filter, try a 10-stop filter so you can get the most out of using these filters. I'm going to now explain a little bit more about ND filters to you. So when you go to buy your ND filter, and Derek, can you hear me okay? Everything's good?
You're good.
Okay. When you go to buy these filters, I would say there's going to be an optical density number, which means nothing. It's something that an engineer created, and the numbers are 0.3, 0.6, 0.9. But what that's referring to is the stop of light, how the filter will affect your camera with one stop of light. But what is one stop of light? So for every stop of ND filter, for every stop on the ND filter, you will halve the amount of light entering the camera. So when the light is halved, to maintain the same exposure, you need to double your shutter speed. So this is kind of a little chart. So if you buy one stop filter, it's halving the light. If you buy the 10-stop filter, you're going a thousandth of the stops of light. So I'd say like the best way to do it is to do one stop, 3-stop, a 6-stop, a 10-stop, and then you're able to use all these varieties. But if you want the best bang for the buck, go for the 10-stop or the 6-stop, and then you'll be able to shoot in like broad afternoon light. And it's really, really amazing to be able to do that. Great. So what if it's a sunny day? So ISO, shutter speed, and aperture all affect the amount of light hitting your sensor. You guys all pretty much know that. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna shoot with the lowest native ISO. Typically is 100. You're gonna use a higher f-stop number, typically f16 or f22 if it's in the afternoon. If it's a little bit later in the afternoon, it's not so bright, you can use f8. And that really depends on how long you want the exposure to be. Because what you're doing is you're gonna wanna let the least amount of light in, which will extend your shutter speed. Think about it, we're trying to extend the shutter speed. If you're using 100 ISO and f22 and you still want a longer exposure, this is when you use an ND filter. So how do you use an ND filter? First, you find your composition. Like any photographer who goes out with a tripod, a lot of them will just go wherever you can, plop your tripod, and that's your shot. I don't recommend doing that. I say get your cell phone out, walk around, get the best creativity with composition. And sometimes that means squatting, getting low, getting high. Don't just go at the easiest placement of your tripod. Then once you get the perfect angle, set up your tripod. You're gonna take a normal exposure, which means if you wanna put an aperture priority and just get a regular picture, we're gonna call this the test or the baseline. And then you're gonna put your camera from autofocus, because you focused, and then you're gonna put a manual focus, because once you put the filter on, it's gonna have a hard time focusing. So you have this baseline exposure, you put on the filter, and then you're like, well, how now I put the filter on, the settings are not correct. You're gonna use a filter, an app. I'm not good at math. If you wanted to go through and figure out the exact settings, you could, but you could use an app like ND Filter or PhotoPills. On PhotoPills, they have an exposure feature to find the proper exposure. So that makes it so much easier. So let me show you an example. So this is PhotoPills. If you guys don't know this app, it is the best app. It helps me with all my scouting, my planning, and I highly recommend it for many reasons. But this is the exposure app. As you can see on the top, this is the test shot I just took. F11, 1/25th of a second, and 100. That came out with a proper exposure. Now I can reprogram the second one. I want to keep it at F11. I want the ISO to be 100, and I want to add my 10-stop. So when I put that there, a little calculator pops up on the bottom and it says your shutter speed should be 8 seconds. So perfect. So now I put these new settings into the camera and I cover the viewfinder. That's important because you don't want any light leak. When you leave your shutters open for such a long time, there can be some light leak happening through your viewfinder. This has rarely happened to me, but I still think you should pay attention to it. And then you can use your remote trigger, or another pro tip would be to use a 2-second delay on your timer if you don't have a remote trigger. Another cool thing about PhotoPills that will help you with scouting is if you want to learn how to figure out when the blue hour will be, you can use their sun schedule, and you can see here the blue hour starts at 5:34, or what time sunset will be. You can find out what time the Milky Way core will rise at 2:27 on this day, and also what the phases of the moon will be. Here's an example of these things in action. The night AR feature and the pills helps me with all my nighttime photographs. So I was in this cave in Hawaii, and I thought, how cool would it be if I could shoot this in the middle of the night? And if I went back at the time listed on the top, the Milky Way core would have been right through the center of the cave, and it would have been cool. And the way I can tell where the Milky Way core is in PhotoPill's app. The orange circle symbolizes where the core will be. On this right-hand picture, you can see the circle. There's a dot in the middle and all these circles around it. What that signifies is the rotation of the stars and the rotation of the planet. So if you wanted to do a star trail picture, like I found this cool lake, and I was wondering if I could get a reflection of the star trails in the water, I could, because I saw that the North Star was right above it in a cool angle. So I'm always looking to see either where the Milky Way core will be, or also where the North Star will be, and how the stars will be rotating with my composition.
Susan, we did have a question come in on ND filters.
Sure.
So Diego wants to know why some variable ND filters create irregular attenuation, and so irregular images being captured. So for those of you who don't know what attenuation is, we're basically talking about haze. So atmospheric haze, when, if you see a hazy day and the light is being scattered and you're not getting the full beam of light in. Is there anything you've noticed in using different neutral density filters?
I've never really used a variable one. So is that what the question was about?
Yeah, it was on variables. Mm-hmm.
I never used one. I've only seen my clients use them, and it's always been where they end up buying a constant one because it's just frustrating. But it could be because think about it as two polarizing lenses coming together, and as they get closer together, they're kind of darkening. At least that's how I understand it to be. So maybe because they're working with two panes of glasses, they're getting a little bit more refracted light. But I hope that helps, but I'm not quite sure because I don't have too much experience with variable filters.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No. Oh, it looks like it was good timing because it looks like we're rolling into ND filters now. So.
Yeah, this is our big ND filter push.
Perfect.
So the question, next lineup is, when do we actually use ND filters? So I always grab my ND filters when there's clouds, especially those big white boofy ones on a windy day. If there's moving water and you want to capture that milkiness, if there's cars and you want to create motion, or if there's people in my shot, I can do a long enough shot where the people move through the shot. So here's kind of your basic settings if you're going to use an ND filter during the day. You're going to start off with your lowest ISO, which could be 100 or it could be 50 or 64 if you're shooting on mirrorless. You're going to shoot with a high aperture. This is in the afternoon because you want to shut down your camera as much as possible, your aperture as much as possible. So f16. You'll also get a starburst effect with the lights of the sun. You're going to shoot raw. You're going to use your remote trigger on a 2-second timer. I recommend using a lens hood so you have no reflected light going in through your lens and covering up the eyepiece. Warning, guys, long exposure photography is highly addictive. You don't just take one shot. You're going to do at least 10 shots a session. So, per picture. So I'm warning you. You guys know it. I'm sorry, but I highly recommend it as well. All right, guys. So finally, we're in the photo part. You're going to get to see how I use the filters and why I do the things I do. So this is without a filter. It's typical Acadia coastline on a foggy morning. It looks cool, but pretty average, nothing special. So I thought every time I'm like at a body of water, I always think, what would this look like with the 10-stop filter? So I put the 10-stop filter. I'm able to make my shutter speed 10 seconds and capture the motion of the water. Instantly, the picture has more interest, right? And one thing I do want you to notice, it did look warmer. And the B&W filters do have a slight warm cast on it. So I actually like it, but that's why I shoot raws, just in case there's a color cast with your filter, you can fix that easily. But I actually like the little bit of warmness that this B&W ND filter creates. Same thing here. This is a 30-second exposure in Iceland. I like to, like, you know, you can freeze the water and that looks cool, but like, what about creating something a little bit moodier? This was like a dreary day. I wanted to capture the motion and emotion of this picture, of this scene. Okay, I'm going to show you two pictures back to back and see if you guys can tell the difference. So this is a regular shot, 3.2 seconds, because it was really cloudy. I can make it a longer exposure by shooting on a tripod. It looked okay. I got a little bit of motion in the water. You can see it happening, and you can see the detail in the clouds. If I look, now I added the filters, 30 seconds, and you can see now the clouds don't have any detail, which is kind of interesting. And there's a lot more milkiness in the water. Another thing to be aware of is if there's a lot of wind and there's trees in your shot, you're going to get motion in the trees as well. So if you look at the top of these trees, you can see a little bit of motion. One's not better than the other. You know, they're both longer exposures, but you can just create different images by putting on the filters. Here's a picture. I don't know if you guys chime in if you know where this is in the Hudson Valley. It's an amazing location. One of my favorite spots to go for fall foliage, right on the Hudson River. Great spot near the Tappan Zee, no, not Tappan Zee Bridge, the Bear Mountain Bridge. But what I love to do here is it was a cloudy day. I did a longer exposure, 13 seconds, but I wasn't getting enough movement of the clouds. So I ended up putting the 10-stop filter on, and now I'm able to look like I'm in a time warp. But you do see a little bit, I don't really actually see too movement in the trees. It must have been the sky, the clouds are really moving, but there wasn't much wind on the ground level. But just the difference in the two pictures. Sometimes with the filter, you can't get enough cloud movement because the clouds are moving slowly. That's why I went with the 30-second exposure to really capture that movement. Here's another example. It was a really beautiful day, big puffy white clouds, very windy. I wanted to see if I could make the lake look really flat. And by putting on this filter, I was doing a 20-second exposure, get the motion of the clouds, get a little bit of movement in the trees, which I'm okay with. Okay, we've all shot this before. Bow Bridge and Central Park. All those annoying boaters keep running through the pictures and kind of ruining your shot. If you put on a filter, all of a sudden there's no more boaters. And you might ask, why is that? Because the boaters didn't stay still long enough to be captured in the frame. And sometimes if there's someone, like, say, standing on the bridge the whole time, they might have been in the picture and I might have had to Photoshop them out. But if there was a boater that went through the scene, they kept on moving and the camera didn't capture them as a static object. So see the difference? See how you can take a normal scene like this that's just a snapshot and really get creative with it? And this is only an 8-second exposure. All right, I wanted to show you this picture. I don't really use graduated filters too much anymore, but I don't really have too many samples on me, so I wanted to show you this one. So the two differences between these pictures is I had a 10-stop filter and I used a gradient filter. And maybe it was like a 2-stop gradient filter. And what that means is the dark part of the slide, there's a dark part of the slide and the clear part of the slide. So typically this is great if you have a flat horizon. It's not ideal for this scenario, but I still tried it out. So the problem I was having to the left was that the sky was too bright. And yes, I could have done a HDR picture and done multiple different exposures and put it together in post, but I wanted to have the picture done in camera. So I took the filter, I put it over the top of the frame, and I held it there for the duration of my shot. And I was able to get the sky in, which looks really nice. Which isn't nice is that I was able to darken the trees. If you look real closely, I darken the trees. But that is typically how I use the gradient filter. I do recommend using it on more of a flat surface than on a mounted surface like this. But they are really effective if you don't want to do a lot of post-processing and get your images done in camera. Here's just a waterfall. I was able to get that milkiness by doing a 15-second exposure. I wanted to show you guys the difference. Here's a shot with no filters, pretty snapshot, looks great. Anyone can take this with their iPhone. And then I put on a filter and was able to capture this with only 0.5 seconds. I did this shot at 30 seconds, at 10 seconds. And this was my favorite one because the water is moving so fast that it was really too milky when it was 10 seconds. And also, it was a super windy day that all the trees in the foreground were blowing. I didn't quite like that effect. So there's something to be really mindful about when you're doing these shots. The motion of the water, but also motion of your foreground elements and the sky. So those are like the three things to be mindful of. And to take your time and take a variety of different shots to get the look that you wanted. I really didn't think that this would be my favorite shot. I thought, oh, whatever. I just want to make sure I have something to show, you know, see what it looked like when it was shot fast. I thought I would definitely like one that was 10 seconds, but in the end, it wasn't the one I used at all. So play around with it and explore what each setting does. Pylons become your best friend when you start shooting long exposures, because what you're looking for in your shots is something static for something to move around. So in this picture, we have two static things. We have the Freedom Tower, we have the pylons, we have the running water, and we have the moving clouds. So all together, you're gonna want, you're gonna see all that motion. And it's better if the pylons are closer, but I couldn't get into the middle of the Hudson to get them. I just had to take it from the coastline. Now this is a cool shot. You guys probably know where this is, Central Park, amazing sunset. I thought the clouds were fantastic. I shot it for like all the way to complete darkness, and I did a variety of different things. So this is kind of just 2.5 f/22, maxing out my camera settings, as you can see, because I wanted to get as long as I could to see if I could get some water blur and a little bit of cloud movement. But this is what it could get: 2.5, 22 at 100 at these lighting scenarios. Then it got darker, so I was able to change my settings to this at 30 f/8, 30 seconds, and I thought that looked really cool. And since I was just enjoying my time and watching this incredible sunset unfold, I thought, what would happen? What would it look like if I put my 10-stop filter on? Because it was already so dark, putting the 10-stop filter on, I could not do 30 seconds. I needed, or if I did, I'd have to raise my ISO, and what was the purpose of that? So I thought, let's put it on bulb mode. And the way bulb mode is that you can keep the shutter open as long as you want. And you need an intervalometer or a shutter release to keep it down, because once you put it on bulb mode, you have to hold down the button on your camera, and nobody's going to do that because they're going to shake your camera. So you need a shutter release to trigger it and then untrigger it. So I put the settings in Photo Pills, and I said, okay, this is my settings that gave me a proper exposure. Now I'm going to put on a 10-step and see how long it would take if I change the settings a little bit. So I was able to do a 2-minute exposure and get the clouds to look like this. If I had a 6-stop filter, I could have done it differently. I actually had to raise my ISO because it was actually going to take too long. I didn't want to sit there for longer than 2 minutes. And maybe I actually did. And the blur was too much that it became boring. So think about that when you're shooting your sky. I've done a lot of these, and when you do it for too long, the sky just loses interest. It's a perfect balance of keeping texture in the sky as well as not blurring it too much, and then it looks like, oh, it just looks like a boring overcast day. So the secret spot was about 124 minutes for the speed of these clouds, 124 seconds. Beautiful sunset. I loved it. Let's put the 10-stop filter on. 30 seconds later, it looks like we're in like a oasis. You're able to get some water ghosting around the rocks, which is really cool, and the clouds blurring.
Susan, we had a question come in, a couple of questions actually. One shot, or one question on with the pictures, like with the trees. Do you bracket, or do you clone out, or multiple? I'm at a loss for words here. If you have a shot with the trees, to prevent the trees blowing, do you ever take more than one shot and mask out? That's the word I'm looking for. Yes. Mask out trees.
That is a great idea. So then you can actually put in the trees that you want and then put in the blurred background. I'm going to get into doing some composite photos later, but that's definitely a solution so you don't get these blurred trees, and using the parts of the picture that you want. Then you just have to be a little bit more smart with planning your shots, and then using Photoshop layers and masking, luminosity mask. That's like next level. So I'm going to teach you what you can do, but I'm not going to teach you how to do that with Photoshop. We just don't have enough time. But that's a great solution to getting these trees without the blur, is masking them and creating the ones that are static and adding the blurred background. Good question. This is a cool arch. It's actually a bridge in Bridges National Park, and it's kind of boring, you know, like nothing really was, it didn't have fantastic light. The only thing that I thought seemed interesting was the blue sky that was quickly disappearing by these gray clouds. And I just like haphazardly took a picture just to see if I could get something. And I love the motion of the clouds. It was so weird the way the clouds were moving. But in order to get good cloud pictures, you have to have that contrast of blue and white, gray and white. If you look at the clouds underneath the bridge, they're all white and you barely see anything. So that's something to look for when you're doing these photos, is to have good contrast with your sky, to have the white moving across the blue or the blue moving across the white to really show that motion. Same thing here. We have bright blue skies and white clouds. So I did 30-second exposure with the 10-stop filter, and the clouds just didn't move enough. So I put my 10-stop filter on and my 6-stop filter, creating a 16-stop filter, and use photo pills to calculate what the right speed would be. And I did a bunch of different settings, and I found that 3 minutes was a perfect blur. I did one for 7 minutes and it was too blurry. I did one for 1 minute and it just wasn't enough movement. So that's what's fun about long exposure photography, is you have to do trial and error, and everything's going to be different based on the way the clouds are moving or the water's moving and how fast they're moving. Here's another example where I did a 10-stop and a 6-stop. And the reason why is these clouds over Death Valley and the Badwater Basin were not moving. And at 30 seconds, they barely moved an inch. So I said, okay, I'm going to wait you out. I put the 2 filters on. I raised my f-stop, so that's how I got an even longer exposure. I shot at f16, and that made it even darker. So I needed almost a 10-minute exposure to properly expose for this. So that's how I got the clouds moving so much, because they were moving so slow. Beautiful shot. I love the clouds. I thought everything was nice about this. I got my shot. Now what? Now I put my filter on, and now I can capture some motion. No one says this is better than this. Both are great shots, but I'm always looking to get creative and what could I do that someone else isn't doing. And this is just a 13-minute exposure because, again, the clouds were moving very fast. All right, guys, so we're putting the filters aside, and now we're going to talk about how you guys can do this when you don't have, what time is it, Derek? Just want to make sure.
Right now we're at 3:07.
Okay. We're going to talk about low light settings. So this means when you don't need filters because it's either sunset or sunrise or a little bit around those times. So this shot, 1 second, just to get some motion of the water. Amazing. And you're going to have to take these water shots a bunch of times because what happens is the waves come in at different speeds. Sometimes they don't come in at all. And you're just trying to get that perfect crash. And what also I thought was interesting was there was a fog rolling in at this Sharkfin Cove in California, and I still got a little bit of that blue sky. If I didn't get that blue sky in the corners, I don't think it would have been as interesting. But look at the sky as well. Regular waterfall, 1/13 of a second, just it's in the shade on a shady day. Was able to get this shot without a filter. Again, this is after sunset. It was quite dark actually. And I was able to do 2-second exposure without a filter. Now these are interesting. I want you guys to really get creative with long exposures. And this is Acadia National Park, not that you can tell, but I think I call these what did I call this? Just moving the camera. So you're basically taking the camera, you have it on long exposure because you're in the shade, you're in some place where it's dark, you're properly exposing for, these are those white trees. Derek, what are those white trees called?
Birch.
Birch, good. So these are a forest of birch trees. I'd already shot it a lot and I go, how do I get creative? So I basically focus on the birch trees and then just tilt my camera up, straight up, and you got this Monet look. And I think it's really interesting and creative just by doing a quick little pan or a quick little down. This is the same effect by shooting the same speed. My friend is walking in front of me and I kind of just zoom out from them. And you get it look like they're walking through a time warp. This is just doing nothing really, just zooming in and zooming out and panning up and panning down. Same thing here. If you guys have ever shot here, this is Grand Central Terminal, not very much light. You can't bring a tripod. I balanced my camera on one of those overlooks where the staircases are and just zoomed out, just getting something unique by zooming out in the middle of a long exposure, which was only 6 seconds. This one's one of my favorite shots, and because it's a really busy scene in the Oculus, and in the Oculus, they do not like to have you using tripods as well. So once again, I'm balancing on the edge of the Oculus platform. And what I learned is because of the shake of the building and the shake of my shaky hands, between 1 and 2 seconds is the maximum I could do it without shaking the picture. So 1 second, I was able to get all these people walking through the Oculus and just one lone photographer standing in the middle that actually stayed still for the whole time, which I think is really telling. And this is just the same thing. Zooming out in the middle of a night scene creates something that looks like the Matrix. All right, guys, so a low light, blue hour. What I love about blue hour is the beautiful quality of light that happens about 30 minutes before sunrise and after sunset. Balanced light that is soft and low in contrast is great for cityscapes because you can balance the sky and the glow of the city lights. And it's also an opportunity for creating car trails, cloud blurs, and water blurs without filters. This is a long exposure shot. I'm sure most of you New York Cityers have shot here. This is from Dumbo. 15 seconds, right at blue hour. You get that nice milky water. You're able to get the city lights balanced with the sky, and the water is perfect. You'll notice that I'm shooting at f/2020 in most of these shots because what I like to do is I like to capture the bridge lights and the city lights and street lights as starbursts. So by doing at f/22, it narrows down the aperture of the camera and creates a starburst effect. Same thing here. And what was so lucky was that I was able to get a boat, a party boat going by and create this purple water reflection on the right. It was just super lucky. And I'm always looking for interesting composition because you can do a long exposure photo and it could be nothing if your composition isn't good. So always look for these unique photos. All right, this is also in Dumbo, right by the beach. I'm sure lots of you guys have shot here. And I'm gonna talk you through 3 different varieties of this shot. This is 30 seconds. What I was going for was that milky look. And one thing, if you ever go and shoot by the beach here in Dumbo, is to wait for a boat to pass and you get these waves crashing. It's also great to go at blue hour because that, what's the thing called? Jane's Carousel gets too bright and will blow out in your nighttime photos. So blue hour is actually balanced with the city lights and the sky. So it's like the perfect time to go. So this must have been a big wave that came and crashed along the rocks and it was really perfect. Here's another one. I want you to see the difference. This was 30 seconds and this was 5 seconds. And the reason why I did this was because there was so much texture in the sky this night. Like these clouds were just ridiculous. And I guess it was either the moon or the city lights that were illuminating them. And I wanted it to kind of reflect on the water crashing on the rocks, which was really cool at the same regards. And that's why I only did 5 seconds because I wanted to capture the detail in both. Here's another example. When I did it longer, like 30 seconds, the clouds blurred and the water blurred too much. So I waited for a wave to come and I was able to do it only in 25 seconds just to get the water pulling out on the rocks. So definitely wait for those waves. Another thing you could do with long exposures is simplify your pictures. This is just a lake, a cool rock, a cool sky. Simple. Moonrise over Manhattan, a little bit during blue hour to get a little bit of light in the sky so it's not completely black. All right, guys, now we're going to talk about my favorite type of light painting from the moon, moonlit nights. I've been doing a lot of these lately because it's been a full moon and now a little bit less. You're like, hey, but this is daytime. It is not daytime. This is a moonlit roadway in Zion. You can see some of the stars. This is also moonlit from the side. It's amazing how your camera at 20 seconds can pick up so much light that it almost looks like daylight. And it's probably my favorite composition. My favorite type of photo involves a little bit of moonlight, some stars and some clouds. And in this one, that's actually a shooting star that happened right on this walkway. Moonlight illuminating the clouds. I mean, and you can see the stars behind it. Just phenomenal. So If you guys are like, oh, I only want to shoot when there's a new moon and bright skies, that's good. But this is like easier, and you get a lot of light and interesting light hitting your foreground and interesting composition when there's clouds. So definitely go out when the moon's out, lighting your way. Again, this is actually after dark. This isn't lit by the moon, but this is in New York City. It was a rainy day. I'm walking home along Central Park. It's nighttime, and I was able to do a 30-second exposure, and that burst of light is actually street light. And I knew that these flowers wouldn't stay on the tree past the day because it was windy. It was just amazing, and I thought no one would believe that this is a nighttime photograph, but it totally was. All right, guys, we're going to talk about capturing motion. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple quick questions.
Sure.
When would you go under ISO 100? What is the potential negative effect of that?
Well, I guess you're talking probably about a mirrorless camera. I would say there's probably not a negative effect if it's like a native number on your, I don't know which camera you're talking about, but like I shoot I64 on a Sony. If you go to like modes like L, like some cameras have like ones that are going to be like the lower speeds that are just, I don't think you should use things like L, or ones that the camera is forcing it to be a lower ISO because those aren't native, and then you could run into some complications. But if it's like a native one like 64 or 50 that's in the Sony, you can definitely use those ones. And it gives you a couple more stops of light. But don't use like L or some of those other modes that are going to give you a lower ISO that aren't really native. They're like, I don't know exactly what they are because I don't use them. But yeah, don't use them.
And yes, and a question on your post-processing, if you do anything in camera, or how do you post-process?
I use a lot of Lightroom and even some Photoshop. So sometimes I'll use some noise reduction, and those pictures were pretty highly processed, the ones that include the waters crashing. Like I really wanted to accent the waves. So I definitely went through and brightened those bursts of the water just to highlight that. Even here, I used a dodging tool to dodge the water to brighten up those waters just so that really caught your attention because I thought they were so special. So yeah, I use a lot of Lightroom and Photoshop. I also use Starry Night Stacker and Starry Night Stacker, a couple other things I'm going to get to when I do the night photography. All right, guys, capturing motion. Here is car trails. They're really easy to capture. I highly recommend doing them when you're doing the Blue Hour. This is in Sedona, Arizona, right on top of Airport Mesa. And what's really lucky about this spot is that a lot of people go to see the sunset on top of this mountain and then come down the hill. So you'll have a lot of cars riding by, and I had to do a 30-second to get the full car trail. So think about that. Sometimes if the car moves too slow, I'll stitch together 2 shots and fire away and try and make it look like it was continuous. But this one actually was 30 seconds was enough to get that whole car moving down the road. New York City is the perfect place to do car trails. I love seeing the buses go by and the taxis. I believe this was a taxi. This is right in front of the Oculus. So this would be a car streak, 30 seconds, you get the streak. But what if you want to capture a taxi? So what I learned by actually putting together this presentation was the magic number that I used to capture taxis was 1/13 of a second. And granted, some taxis are going to be going slower and faster, so it may not always work. But this is in Times Square. And just to show you how the camera picked up the light, your ISO here was 320 at 1/13 of a second. This is back in front of the Oculus. It's so much darker. I was shooting at 8,000 and 1/13 of a second. So just interesting to see the difference because Times Square is so bright and this area is just not as bright. So you may have to raise your ISO to get a shutter speed like that. And what I mean like that is a faster shutter speed because you're trying to capture still the shape of the taxi. Here's a 2-second exposure, another car streak of a bus going by. Car trails going up and down 10th Avenue during Blue Hour. This one's a composite. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So you'll notice that the Grand Central Terminal is black and white. I photoshopped that. and this is the finished product. But this was my first shot. I kept getting card streaks at 15 seconds. I couldn't get the taxi to be still. So what I did was I took another shot for 10 seconds. And what I was lucky about this shot was that the car stopped because there was a red light. So I got a little bit of motion because within the 10 seconds, the car was stopped and then continued on. So it was enough to capture the motion of the taxi. So I put together that taxi and the streaks and created this picture. So sometimes it's hard to do it all in one frame like that person was asking. And it's okay to try and do it in post-processing. If you want to get little elements of your picture and then stack it together with layer masks, you can totally do that. Light painting. This is my favorite topic, and I'm ready to dive in. So what we're going to talk about is ambient light versus your light source, your angle of light, your quality of light, which means soft light versus hard light, and constant light versus strobe lights. All right, guys, so this is a scene I took 2 days ago. It's a beautiful shot, balanced rock. It was cool. You get the Milky Way core behind it. But then all of a sudden, as I'm taking the pictures, cars are coming down and light painting the rock. So it took a lot of patience, but I was able to get the rock to be light painted. And then what I did was I light painted the tree. And this is what it looked like, a completely different scene. Granted, if I was going to light paint the rock, I would have light painted it a little bit from the side and not have it be so direct. But you really capture the size of this rock. This is bounce rock. And how I lit paint the tree was I didn't do it from the front. That's important. This is what we're going to talk about is the angle of light. I basically lit it from 90 degrees, almost behind it. So you can see the shadow on the front of the tree. So that's important. You never want to light from behind the camera because then it looks like you're just flashing it. Another technique that I was using, because I was using a video light, I think I was using actually a ProPhoto B1 because I had it in my pocket. Oh no, or maybe it was a Lytra. No, the ProPhoto B1. It creates a nice soft light. So when you're going to do any light painting and you're going to use a video style light, you should count your time because every time could be different. So I would go count to 8. I knew it was an 8-second exposure. I started off with 2, 3, 4. I did a bunch of tests, and 8 seconds was the best to get this tree properly lit, but not too lit because you don't want it to look too bright. So I would light paint the tree, and I basically would take the light from the side like this, light paint it, go up and down, and then light painted the shrubs a little bit on the side. And I counted to 8, and then I turned my light source off and then waited for the 25 seconds to be over. That's important if you're going to use video light. Another video light, this is the Lytra. I think I explained this earlier, just a constant video light for the whole duration of this because there's only 0.5%. This is a cool shot because I didn't light paint it. There was other photographers in double arch, and as I was walking away, this is all moonlit except for inside the double arch. There were photographers light painting it, and I kind of just stole their light painting and took this shot. This is on a Death Valley workshop I did with Chris Nicholson. The secret to this shot is that it was light painting from the side, so I'm basically at 90 degrees. I'm pretty sure Chris was using a Luxley Viola, and the secret to this one was getting real low because if I shot from a low angle, you're able to create the shadows, which is showing the ridges of the sand dunes. And then Chris's technique was he was taking the Luxley Viola and kind of panning it across and then shutting it off. So when you go to do these shots, I should start just from the beginning. What you're going to do is you're going to expose for the background. So we did a test shot, just exposing for the stars. And then we added a light source. And the light source might take a couple different variations. You might have to power it up or power it down to get it to notice it. So first you start with the shot of just the ambient light, and then you add your light source, and then power that up and down to get your shot. This is one of my favorite shots. It's from Trona Pinnacles. If you would see this without any light painting, you would say, oh, okay, that's kind of boring. But what I did was I had that Coast flashlight that has a super strong beam, and I'm standing over to the right of the frame. So, and pointing it across that little water pool and shining it on those far tufas. And then I'm using another flashlight that isn't as strong and lighting the front tufa. And you can see a couple of my light spills, which actually I think are kind of interesting on the ground. So, and I'm using techniques kind of like this, or like this, and I count how long my exposure is just so I can make sure I can replicate it. This is in Acadia National Park. I do a fall foliage workshop, and we went out to do some night stars, and there was no night stars. So I thought, what kind of iconic imagery could we create? And there are these Adirondack chairs, which are pretty much a staple of Acadia. And what I did was I went behind each chair, and I had a flash, and I strobed each chair and hid behind it. In all honesty, there was a version of me, you can see me, and I had to edit myself out, but it was an easy edit. I just kind of copied the darkness and put myself out of the picture because it's hard to hide behind that chair, but that's how you can create some interesting images with some light painting. Light painting the train. What makes this picture successful is that the light painting, again, happened from the front of the train. If I would have been behind the camera, it would just look flat. But you can see how the shadows kind of caress the train to the side. And then I even ran behind the train and light painted it behind the wheels. Again, light painting from the side. What I liked about this one is that's the moon rising, Mars, and the Milky Way core, and this cool tree that I found. So I call it like the trifecta of pictures. I got all these three cool things in one shot. Again, light painting from the side. And again, I'm using probably video lights. So when I use a video light versus using a strobe like a flash is when my subject is not moving. And thankfully, these goblin pillars in Goblin Valley do not move. So I was able to go to the front side. Think about how you would light a face. That's what I was thinking. I wanted to give it depth and dimension, and also creating shadows in front of your camera. Shadows are what makes these pictures so interesting. Again, light painting with the Luxury Viola from the side, taking the flash and kind of moving it left and right, using a nice gold light to counterbalance the blue light of the sky. This one actually light painted with my iPhone, believe it or not. I didn't have a flashlight with me, but I found this great pothole, and I'm a pothole seeker. I'm always looking for potholes with iconic New York City imagery behind it. So I used the flashlight feature of my iPhone. I shined it on the New York City. I was balancing it, literally laying in the street and waiting for a taxi to go by. People were honking at me, but eventually a taxi went by. I got the shot laying in the street. And you know, you gotta do what you got. Derek, you do this too. You lay in the street, I'm sure, right?
All the
You gotta
time.
do what it takes. This was kind of a long exposure. There wasn't any stars yet, and I thought, how cool would it be? Actually, I was just really killing time. So I put it on bulb mode. I took a kind of a gamble because I didn't know how long it would be. I took the Luxury Viola and pointed at my feet and ran up the mountain, back and forth, and crossed back and forth. I tripped at least 5 times. You can probably see where I tripped because I'm literally running in the dark and creating these cool patterns. And I ran 7 miles this day because I kept redoing it and thinking I could do it better. That is one of the things with long exposure photography is you always think the next shot will be better. So you keep on doing it. So yeah, 7 miles, guys. It was impressive. Another light painting picture in Trona Pinnacles, and light painting again, landscapes in ancient Bristol Cone National Forest. Great. Now we're going to talk quickly about light graffiti. I use light cubes, light painting brushes, a smartphone, video light, headlamps, flashlights, anything. This is using the cool little light cube. And when you want to do light graffiti like this, you actually have to write backwards, or you can flip the image, but I don't like to do that. So basically, you might take some practice. NYC is pretty easy to write, but you're going to write it backwards like if you're writing it in a mirror. So try it a couple times and you'll see exactly what I mean. It may mean you switch your mind on backwards, but actually it's kind of easy once you get the hang of it. This is like graffiti as I took a regular flashlight. I did not have to write this backwards. And what I did was I used the flashlight like chalk. And I basically kept it almost touching the ground. So the beam was so narrow that it was only the light spilling out underneath the flashlight. And I kind of wrote, I turned it off between each letter, and I wrote, I love New York City. And it's kind of like writing with chalk. Isn't that so cool? Like you can just write your own graffiti and then it disappears and you don't get arrested. I mean, come on. But you need a strong flashlight for that. This is with the red headlamp. My friend, he's not a light painter. We called it a fantasy tour because we went out around the Everglades in a van. And he just wrote basically on the van with a red headlamp, fantasy. And works perfectly. Now this is another thing I like to do is go to creative spots, not creative spots, to go to places that are shot so much and getting creative shots. So this is during a workshop I do in Central Park. I use probably use this as my light wand. I ran around the fountain because I wanted to get a reflection in the fountain, and it was a multi-person effort. I ran around getting my cardio. Someone stood behind the fountain, illuminating it with the Coast flashlight to get the water dropping from behind. And another student put the flashlight on the angel to illuminate it. So it's such an interesting shot because it's just like so many different things happening. And it's a unique shot because not many people went around the fountain like this. Here is the pixel stick in action. You can, this is one of actually the shapes that it's used. I basically ran around, it's a 5-foot stick, ran around the woods and getting closer and farther, and you can create interesting patterns like this. Pixel stick and Maggie light, so cool. Another example, I took the pixel stick and spun it in circles, and when you're gonna use the pixel stick or the Maggie light, it's great to find reflection pools like this. And this is at the castle moat, you know, and I made sure it was close enough that the reflections were in the pool, and I went all the way to the end and all the way back, and I kept the camera on bulb mode so I can make through it the whole thing because 30 seconds was too short. This is what I like to say, a happy mistake. I was taking a picture of the Little Italy sign and waiting for traffic to go by, and a car came out of nowhere and I had to move all of a sudden, and I just let my camera was open, and when I looked back I said that's not too bad. So I wanted to show you guys that you don't even need lights. You can just do this with your camera. This is just a long exposure, and I left it for the majority of the time on the Welcome Little Italy sign. So that's what's resonating the most. And then the camera just basically shook all over and created an interesting shot. All right, now we're going to talk about light painting portraits. This is my favorite. I use speed lights, gels. I use a faster shutter speed if there's ambient light. I use flashes instead of video lights. And I want to warn you, humans do not stay still. And I'm going to teach you when to use constant light versus strobe light. All right, so this is a cool shot. The first thing I recommend when you start doing light painting portraits is silhouettes because they're easy. This is in Central Park. And what's great about this spot is that there's no ambient light. At least there wasn't when I took this. So my friend moved to 3 different positions within 30 seconds. And every time he would move, I do my pattern. And basically I'm taking this stick, creating circular motions around him, then turning it off, moving to the next spot. He poses, I turn it on, I do another set of motions, turn it off, he moves over, and he did another set of motion. And you can see it was the clouds are moving because it was a 30-second exposure. This one is a composite, and I want to explain why it is a composite. Because there's so much ambient light underneath, but there's the fountain, that you can't really keep your shutter open long enough unless you have a super strong flashlight. And this is my flashlight maxed out. So if I wanted it to be longer, my flashlight was not bright enough. So in order to have a proper exposure on my flashlight, I just shoot it at 8 seconds. So that's also something you're always balancing is your light of your flashlight. So what I did was I did 3 different takes and then I put it together in post. This is again the Coast flashlight with the focusing beam, and I wanted to explain a little bit more about this picture. What's cool about it is the beam, but also this is my partner Cliff. He's shining a video light in front of him to create the silhouette. If he had not done that, you would just see this weird beam of light coming from the rock and maybe a little bit of the human form. But it's really the shadow created because he took a video light and pointed at the rock in front of him and used the flashlight. This is a nice, using I have 2 different tubes with 2 different colors. I wanted to show this one to show you humans move. So 18 seconds for this shot and too much light create a little bit of blur. I'm not happy with it, but I still wanted to show you guys. If this happens to you, you have to start shooting faster because your model can't hold it. Dancers, on the other hand, are the exception. If you ever want to do light painting portraits, do it of dancers. They're amazing and they can stay still. So we had these 2 dancers, amazing dancers, come And this is now in New York City. So it takes a little bit of a different turn, because in New York City, there's so much ambient light that you can't do 30-second exposures. You can barely do 5-second exposures because the ambient light is hitting your model. So if these weren't dancers, they would be blurry. So 5 seconds, between 5 and like 2 seconds are as fast or as slow as you should go with light hitting your subjects in the city. So I'll show you a couple more. So this is just me running around, no flashes, just this white wand running around with a white wand around the subject. Same thing here. There's so much ambient light from the bridge and the street lights that I could only do 2 seconds before getting a little bit of motion of the subjects. Now, this shot, I wanted to show you, there are no light tubes. All this is a speed light. So I want you guys to show you that you don't even need fancy light tubes. This is just a regular speed light, and I ran around her and took 2 pictures. One, the lighting is from slightly behind to get that light on her side of her face and right behind her. And what I love to do is always shoot my subjects from behind to get rim lighting. Now we're really going to get into doing not silhouettes, but actually light painting and illuminating our models. So luckily enough, my friend has a rooftop view of the Empire State Building. So very lucky. What I did here was, first I took the picture. First I got the ambient light to get the proper exposure of the sky and the Empire State Building. Then I ran around my subject. She stays very still, and with the light wand doing this cool motion. And the very last step is I flash her from the side. You never want to flash her from right behind the camera. You always want to kind of create a side light. If I would have had more space, I would have rim light her, but there's no room. There's a wall right there. Another rooftop shot. This rooftop was completely dark, so that's why I was able to do a 15-second exposure. And I had one shot. This actually won me a camera, the shot. It was at a Sony event, and really cool. So what's cool about the shot is I had one chance to take it. I had practiced before on other friends, but the model only came up and she literally ran in the door after this shot because it was cold out. And I don't blame her. She's wearing nothing and it was freezing and raining. So I ran around with my light wand, and then at the very last second, my friend Steve strobed her from the side and captured her expression. You could tell her hair is slightly blurred because it was blowing in the wind, but I think it tells a story. So you can capture really interesting shots. Same thing here. I used a pixel stick to create this motion of the blue light behind him like he was moving on the skateboard. I did 96 seconds on bulb mode, and I want to explain why. Because this parking lot was completely dark. There was no light. So I actually wanted to carefully light paint in what I wanted to showcase. So I wanted to showcase these trees. So I ran around. After I did the Maggie light, I created that effect. Then I ran around and strobed all these palm trees. And the very last thing was I went right in front of him and light painted his face. So one thing you'll notice is his hand moves, and his hand must have moved when I was light painting the tree, because you can tell it's ghosting. So if you start seeing ghosting, it's because your model is moving. This is a really awesome shot. This model was amazing. It was like 4 degrees out, and I taught a light painting workshop in Central Park, and these students were amazing because they were braving the cold. But this involved 2 people. So my roommate, Michaela, she's amazing, also amazing light painter. The way we did this one was we took the light graffiti, the flashlight, and we painted the circles on the ground. So literally running around the circles, keeping the flashlight pretty close to the ground to create that effect. If the flashlight is farther away from the ground, then the beam will be bigger and you'll kind of lose the effect. Then I went around with the speed light and strobed her once from behind, once from the other side. You'll notice one more light flare, and that is because that's a street lamp. And once from the side of her face. So I wanted that rim light, and I wanted beautiful side light on her face. And I did it again at like a 45-degree flash on her face. One thing that you'll notice is this was 30 seconds. And the reason why I could do a 30-second shot in Central Park, again, Bethesda Fountain is the best place to do this because there's no ambient light except for that street light. And that street light was hitting her from behind. So it actually didn't affect the light on her face. Unlike here, this is also in Central Park. Because it was winter, there was a light coming through the top of this trestle hitting her face, and you could see the motion on her face. It's just not successful. If I would have turned her around or something, or moved her forward where the light, that's all street light, a street light coming through the trestle and creating, you could see it on the bottom of the ground. That's not good because that's constant light hitting their subject. And if they move at all, then they get that light blur. Another shot. This is on a rooftop. Again, it was a really noisy, ugly background. It was like a radiator. I was able to make that disappear by using light painting. This is at Burning Man, again, exposing for the background and then using a light tube to circle around them and create that effect, and then strobing them at the very end. Also at Burning Man, I'll explain this one very quickly. I shot at f10 because I wanted my speedlight to look like a starburst. So what I did here was, you can see the yellow light, that's the light painting tube. So first I ran around her with a light painting tube. Then I took the speedlight and I strobed her once from the left side, so you can see that beautiful light, once from behind, and once from the other side. So you can see she's actually like, the light is like cutting her out of the frame. And then lucky enough, an art car with lots of lights created that cool, colorful panel behind her. If you guys are ever into light painting portraits, Burning Man's the place to go. It's amazing. This is a light painting portrait I wanted to do of a fireman during 9/11 memorial. And I just used the light painting wand to create a circle around him and strobed him at the very end. But again, I exposed for the ambient and then made my light work to make it properly exposed. All right, guys, let's get into fire. Who doesn't love a little bit of fire in their shots? This is just a whisk, a Brillo pad, and a dog leash. And you kind of make this cage. So you take the cage of a whisk, like a whisk you beat pancakes with, you put a Brillo pad in it, and you put a dog leash on it. So you have this long thing. When you light up the Brillo pad, it'll start to spark, but it's when you spin it that it creates this effect. Don't do this in places where you can get in trouble or set things on fire. This is in Las Vegas in a mud flat area, so there was actually nothing to catch on fire. But what I did was, I had someone else spinning the fire, and I had someone else shining the flash. And I recommend doing it for shorter exposures, because I did one for 10, 20, 30. What happens is the fire will keep burning and it'll just get brighter and brighter. The effect for when you do this is actually, you could get a couple of spins and that's the best of it. And you also want to get off multiple frames. So by shooting at 8 stops, you can maybe get off 2 or 3 frames before the fire dies, because it probably only lasts like 30 seconds tops. But definitely explore with fire. It's very fun. Stars. This is very simple. If you guys ever want to go shoot the Milky Way, use photo pills, find where the Milky Way core will be, go somewhere dark. And these are my basic settings. 30 seconds, 2.8, 3200, and you'll be in the right ballpark. And then you can adjust accordingly. This is in Hawaii, where I saw the best Milky Way core ever. And this cool tree happened to be there. But yes, that's your go-to Milky Way core settings, and then adjust if you have a lot of ambient light or if you have distracting elements, you could adjust from there. This is a star trail, my first star trail picture actually in Sedona. It was a constant picture. So basically, I left my exposure on my camera open, my shutter speed open for 25 minutes, and I used photo pills to figure out the setting for 25 minutes and let the stars rotate. What the con is of doing this is, if planes go through the picture, then you kind of get these plane trails and they become a nuisance to remove. Another way to do it is to take pictures every second. So that's what I did here. So I did, my settings were 2.8, 3200, and I did it every second for 45 minutes. And then I used Starry Night stackers to do this. So it's really a free software. It's amazing. And you put all the pictures together. First, you have to make them a JPEG, and then it puts it together, and you get this amazing effect. I use the effect on that called Comet, which makes it look like the stars are slightly comets. The one thing you'll notice in this picture is there's a haze, and that was because a cloud came through, and that's what's causing that haze through the picture. It's a pain in the neck. I tried to edit it out. It did not work. But star trails are great when there's no clouds. another thing you could do with that technique, because you took so many frames for 45 minutes, you can make it into a time lapse. So I'm just going to show you this quick video of a time lapse that I took of a meteor shower. So it's twofold. You can do a star trail or you could do a time lapse. And I just love capturing these motions, you know, like so cool, because who sits there and watch the sky move like that? It's just amazing. So that is a star trail that a time lapse that I did that I could also make into a star trail. And that's over 3 hours. Lastly, you can make a composite. So there's this amazing waterfall in Moab, and I thought, well, how cool would it be? I see the North Star is right above it. If I light painted in the waterfall and then I did a star trail above it. So I did 30 minutes or 40 minutes of star trails. And at the end, I light painted in the waterfall. And then I did a composite of the waterfall and the star trail together. So it's a little bit of 2 shots in one, but it's really amazing. So guys, does anyone have any questions? Here?
We do have some, but we would. Are you wrapping it soon, or I was going to hold off a little bit just to see? Oh, okay, because I didn't want to.
No, I just wanted to review and then also talk about what's upcoming for me. But yes, what are the questions?
No, go for it. I'll let you wrap, and then we'll throw a couple questions in.
Cool. So for anybody who wants to know more about photography, I'm doing a summer school. It's not like your typical summer school. It's going to be really fun with challenges and critiques. And it's going to be online. It's going to be July 1st to the 12th. I'm stationed in Moab, Utah right now, living in an RV. So I'll be doing a Canyonlands and Arches night photography work in August. If anyone is up for traveling, we'll see what that's like. It's kind of like pending based on what's happening right now, but I'll be here. So if you want to come join me and do some night photography, I'd love to teach you. In October, Cliff Piquet and I will be doing a fall foliage chase where we'll start in Nova Scotia. There's a Celtic festival. Nova Scotia is amazing, and working our way through Acadia National Park to do some fall foliage, Harriman State Park in New York and New York City, just chasing the best foliage throughout the season. That's one thing we know we'll be working this year is fall foliage. And next year I'm planning a Maui workshop, the Valley, again, Arches, Canyonlands, Grand Tetons, and South Africa. We just finalized this week. It's going to be amazing. 9 days photos safari through South Africa, through Kruger National Park, and it's going to be amazing. So if anyone wants the Cliff Notes, I know this is kind of rushed. I'm happy to send you my gear guide that links to B&H so you can easily buy all this gear and also give you tips on doing long exposure. Here's my email. Feel free to email me.
Yes, for those, because there were people asking about the gear you use. So there is Susan's email right there. So she can send you all of that stuff that you see there on the screen, the gear guide for long exposure photography and the ebook. So let's see. Well, we will take a couple questions. I know we're a little bit over, but we did have some questions come in. How do you calculate your exposure for moonlight exposures?
So moonlight's very easy, actually, because the camera kind of tells you, like, it's like well, focus is one thing. I was going to go into focus, but moonlight's pretty simple. I typically will start at like 20 seconds, but it's my go-to 20 seconds. But then you realize one thing you can do is you can adjust your ISO. You don't need to be shooting at 3200 ISO like you typically would when you need as much sensitivity on your sensor. So really it depends on what you want your ISO to be and then how long your shutter. So it depends also on my subject. If I'm shooting the stars and I have all this moonlight, I want it to be a little bit shorter so my stars become star points. That's something actually I didn't talk about. There's a rule called the 500 rule. You can find this in the PhotoPills app also, where you can make sure your stars are star points and they don't become star trails. I typically don't shoot anything over 30 seconds because then the stars become star trails. And I typically would edge on 20 to 25 seconds, depending on your focal length. So if you're shooting a wider lens, then you're going to have more, it's going to be easier to get the stars to blur. I mean, actually, no, it's opposite, actually. So just, I would say, when you're shooting with the moonlight, it really depends on if you're shooting at the stars and you want the stars to be sharp, then you'll adjust your settings so to be like 20 or 25 seconds. And then you could adjust your ISO. Does that make sense? It's a little bit a roundabout way.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Processing two or more shots together, like the one with the cars. So Dania is asking if something like that, where you're combining two images, is that something you would send to a contest, or do you feel it as that you're cheating in some way, or?
I don't know. I guess it depends on the nature of the contest. I would say if you have to declare it's a composite, then you declare it's a composite, and then that's it. I don't feel like it's cheating. It's creating art, and like a lot of people do a lot of things to their images. So I feel like when it comes to night photography, if you want to get the best foreground and the best sky, and you're not light painting it, then you need to do a composite. So I don't think it's cheating, but I definitely think you should read the rules of the contest.
Definitely. And I will double down on that and saying that there's a lot of photographers, and just because they're not out there mentioning it, there's a lot of manipulation done to photos, whether it's a small clone stamping of, a sign that's in, or a pole. There's a lot of clone stamping and other manipulation done in photos. So like Susan said, yeah, you'll definitely want to check out the nature of the contest. Obviously, if it's a photojournalism contest, you're not going to touch anything.
Right, exactly.
But if it's something that's more fine art, I think that's kind of par for the course, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we just had another question come in on calculating the exposure for the night shots. Do you use, now you mentioned photo pills.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use photo pills for calculating things such as exposure, or do you use it strictly for positioning of stars and
I definitely use photo pills, but mostly for my ND calc. Whenever I add an ND filter, I always use it for the exposure of that. But whenever I'm doing stars, I typically, if it's a dark environment, I'll start off with 30 seconds, 3200, and 2.8. And that's kind of my go-to, especially if I'm shooting the Milky Way. And then if there's a lot of ambient light, and the city is completely different beast. You kind of need to expose for your surroundings. But photo pills, in terms of starting off with anything, you have to do a couple test shots and get the reading right, and understand if you prefer your shot to have a long exposure or a high ISO. Because typically in night photography, you're going to shoot as wide open as possible. So 2.8 is a given, or f4, whatever. I'd say shoot as fast as you possibly can. And then you decide from there, am I going to be shooting a longer exposure? Is that okay? Is my subject moving? Like, do I want the stars to move? And if you're limited to that, like 20 seconds, then you just mess with the ISO. So those are kind of 3 tiers of creating a proper exposure for night photography.
Okay, perfect. And our last question is on the Dumbo shot in particular.
Sure.
Were you focusing on the bridge of the buildings? And in something like that, what's your, how do you decide what to focus on where there's really no set subject?
That's a great question. So I think they're talking about one of these Dumbo shots where the bridge, I typically focus 3/4 of the way. So I was probably focused on the bridge, and then you could do focus stacking if you really were interested, and just make sure the rocks were a huge part of my picture. Then I would do a check and be like, are the rocks in focus? Typically, if you're doing night photography, as long as your subject is 8 feet away from you, it'll kind of be in the focus realm. Like 2.8, like when I'm doing star photography, people say at 2.8, how's everything in focus? So I've looked at the focus, what is it called? The depth of field focus with my specific lens, and everything after 8 feet will kind of be in a nice focusing range. So as long as I put a subject 8 feet away from my lens, then it's in focus. So I just try and make sure that's the case when I'm shooting like a 2.8 for night photography. But I typically will focus 3/4 of the way into the frame.
Okay, perfect. Well, Susan, thank you so much. Everyone else, thank you for joining in. Again, you can receive the gear guide. So for those of you who had questions on what Susan uses to shoot and all the accessories that she uses as well, you can just shoot her an email and she will send all that. She does have a lot of stuff upcoming. Please follow her on Instagram. Check out Photo Adventures on Facebook and photoadventures.com. Susan, thank you so much again. We will have to get you back. Maybe we'll do a double shot of you and Cliff live from the desert.
I love it. And thank you guys all. I know everyone's time is busy, and thank you for making the time to come hang out and learn about long exposure photography. I hope I've inspired you to go out and get creative. And thank you guys for your time today. Appreciate it. And thank you, Derek and B&H. Appreciate it.
Always, always. We always love having you, and we will look forward to next time.
Sounds good.
All right. On behalf of myself and the Event Space team, this has been another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We'll catch you all next time.